presentation I'm going to be giving you relates to the time I spent with IUCN developing a program on trophy hunting in Pakistan. And before I start the presentation, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background in the context. Normally, trophy hunting begins in many countries on the basis of what hunters do as part of their profession, which is the hunting of wild animals, largely for trophies or largely as part of land management. In this case, the origin of trophy hunting in Pakistan is very different. It actually grew from a community need and responded to poverty issues and the fact that communities in that particular part of the country are very poor, and they were using the animals, the ungulates, the wild population around, for food. So it was a very different perspective from that which is normally traditionally looked at in terms of trophy hunting and the pursuing of wild animals, particularly ungulates in this case, the ibex and the markhor, in terms of their trophies. I think that's quite important because the incentive behind this was not because you had a lot of animals where you were bringing population size down and where you were picking up the most mature individuals because of the trophies in order to ensure the stock is maintained, but largely because there was a complete degradation in terms of the population. And there were very few animals, and the numbers were dropping because they were being poached and hunted for food. So the incentive behind this particular program was, how do you actually build up stock? How do you actually use a possibility, an incentive of trophies in order to ensure that you can build up a population of animals that is seriously endangered in their particular environment? So before we go into the actual case studies, I'll start with a little bit about the genesis of trophy hunting and how it originates in many parts of the world and how particularly it is placed in the organization I worked for, which was IUCN. So we'll start at the beginning. So to start off, the way that IUCN, and it is the CIC, which of course, and the government of Hungary are both members of IUCN, so there is a relationship between what the organization does and what its members do. And the concept of sustainable use in IUCN was recognized many years ago in 1980, well before it became common language in much of the world, but although it has been certainly in Hungary for a long time. It's embedded in the program framework of the organization, and all the activities are addressing some level of sustainable use. And even when you talk about protected areas or World Heritage Sites, one is still looking at the use of those sites in a sustainable way. It's fundamental to IUCN's mission and the program, and it basically involves exploring the links between sustainable use, human livelihoods, poverty, and equity. In fact, if you want to go more deeply into the definition of sustainable use, it's up there on the screen, and it was what was adopted at the World Conservation Congress in 2000. Now, trophy hunting, as you must know, since most people here are hunters, has a great influence on species conservation. And there is a point of view that hunting actually brings down the numbers of species and threatens endangered species. In actual fact, the policy statement and the analysis that we've been using has shown us that the sustainable use for wildlife and for tourism is very, very beneficial when it's properly done in terms of the long-term survival of a species. And many indigenous and local communities are benefiting from the sustainable use of their wildlife and to improving their sustainable livelihoods. So the programs that I'm going to talk about, which are in Pakistan and are recognized globally now as some of the most successful regeneration programs for ungulates in that particular part of the world. There's one in the southwest of Pakistan where basically what was happening before the mid-80s is that the animals were being poached largely for meat, but sometimes illegally actually to sell the trophies. And the people there organized themselves into a community with the local tribal leaders, and they demonstrated that you can control illegal hunting if the community members were willing to police the area themselves and to ensure that those animals that could be captured for a trophy or hunted for a trophy were in a position to give the fee, that hunting fee, back to the community up to 70 to 80%. And that made a huge difference to the livelihoods, where the income was shared within the community for development projects like education, irrigation systems, etc. There were two species that were looked at, the Markhor and the Urial, and both of them are considered high-value trophies. And what one found was that the illegal hunting declined dramatically, and as of 2012, the population was estimated at about 3,500, and when they started, they were down to a few hundred animals. So it's demonstrated quite clearly the correlation between the illegal hunting of animals and turning that around by communities to incentivize them to protect a stock, build it up, and allow legal hunting of a few trophies in a sustainable way, where the maximum revenue of the fee went to the communities which they could use for development purposes. A similar one in the northern areas of Pakistan was in a community called Skoyo. And there, instead of just one village and one community, we had 3 communities joining. And the 3 communities came together to say that they jointly would manage the herds. Now there you're looking again at Markhor and at Ibex, and they were trained, the community people were trained as guides, they were trained as watchers, and in due course, in about 3 years of conserving the stock, they ended up getting a permit for a Markhor hunt, which was the first hunt. This was in 1998, and it brought an income of $25,000, which in any country is quite a lot of money. But in those very impoverished communities, can set up a community almost for a year of development work, which was obviously very gratifying, and it was a huge incentive in terms of community conservation. The Markhor population increased, the community started protecting wildlife from local people, and the hunters come. Even 1 or 2 hunters a year is enough to incentivize the communities to keep the stocks and keep the population counts up. Then the third project was something called the Mountain Areas Conservancy Program, and that was in another area, also in the north of Pakistan, and that started in 2000. And through that project, the communities, again, through the same basic understanding of how to conserve and protect the stock and ensure that the most mature animals were available for a trophy, which was auctioned, the license was auctioned, and the hunters were paid the fee, and again, 70 to 80%, depending on the particular community, went to the community. The rest goes to the government for the overall infrastructure services that they provide. And there were enough animals eventually that the quota for the Markhor hunting was increased to 12 trophies under CITES permission. And about 80% of the fee went to the community, and the income received, for example, in between 1999 and 2006 was about $829,000, of which $654,000 went to the communities. So again, a large amount of money in return for conserving the animals, and not surprisingly, the herds have increased considerably because of that. There are also lots of other benefits, tourism benefits, guides, watchers, and local domestic tourism in the villages, places to stay, homestays. All that benefits the community as well through this program. Then even now, the projects continue, but they've widened further now, and now one is looking more in terms of the state of nature in the area and biodiversity more generally, and how these sorts of incentives that have been given to communities can be expanded to look at other kinds of projects like medicinal plants and illegal trade networks of wildlife trade, and the multiplying aspect of the infrastructure in that particular area and how it impacts positively and negatively on the particular species. So the initial work, which was at that point confined just to certain villages and certain species, has now expanded to looking at the overall area and the landscape to ensure that one is looking at the degradation of certain development interventions on the species and how one can actually use the communities to ensure that those interventions are not damaging to what has been built up over the years. So the biodiversity and livelihoods of local communities in selected locations are being looked at, examined, protected, and brought in as part of the overall management of the species through the trophy hunting program. That includes the impact of climate change, because this is up in the north where the glaciers are, and as a result, with glacial melt, it has a fairly important impact in terms of the waters downstream, and so it's really important that one links all these different aspects together in the discussion. The project that I spoke about first was actually presented in CIC as part of the projects that have been awarded prizes to demonstrate sustainable use and the importance of trophy hunting and sustainable use. And it's there, and in 2010, it got one of the CIC prizes as one of the most important global projects. Trophy hunting is not without its challenges, and in any country there is often sometimes a certain amount of abuse of the licenses and a certain amount of corruption, and so it's always important that one monitors these extremely well, and one needs to ensure that the income that is derived from the license fee goes to the local people and isn't sucked up by intermediaries or by people who essentially take from the fee that should go directly to the community. Quotas are generally limited, but you also have to ensure that the benefit sharing is equitable between communities, so you don't end up with one community getting richer when others are also helping conserve the animals. And in addition to that, you also have to be really careful that the stock isn't overexploited and the numbers don't go down beyond any particular point, because otherwise the whole basis of the program and the idea of sustainable use is no longer valid and credible in terms of the long-term future of such trophy hunting programs. So once one has established that this model works, and one has, then of course one is in a position to extend it to other animals, other species, and one benefit we've seen of this particular program has been that the snow leopard numbers have gone up considerably in northern Pakistan, mainly because as the prey species goes up, the snow leopard numbers also go up. And so an animal like the snow leopard, which was elusive and very difficult to see, now is much more prevalent, and you can see it often enough. So that's another benefit, because there's a great deal of tourism potential in bringing people in to watch snow leopards. So all of these demonstrate the impact of the program and the benefits of trophy hunting. And I'll stop there, and if there are any questions or any comments, I'm happy to take them for the audience.